Welcome to Wired 4 Wonders Tales. Tonight's tale is called The Vanishing Within. Let's descend into the dark. Sarah was, by her own estimation, a solid size 8. Not tiny, not huge. Just an average 42-year-old carrying a few too many comforts. She started her diet with the usual grim resolve. But after the first week, something unusual happened. She felt lighter. Not just marginally, but distinctly like walking on a floor with marginally less gravity. Her clothes should have felt loose, but the belt cinched exactly the same way on her favorite trousers. Confused, she stepped onto the digital scale. The glowing red numbers mocked her. 148.5 pounds. Exactly the same as the day she started. Digital scales are unreliable, she muttered, tossing it aside. The second week, the lightness turned into a startling hollowness. Her collarbones began to jut out like twin shelves, and her face was suddenly all sharp, dramatic angles. In the office, her co-worker, Mark, paused. "Sarah, are you okay? You look intense. Like you just came back from a retreat." She smiled, a nervous, stretched thing. She had lost weight, drastically so. Yet, her favorite navy blue pencil skirt, the one she wore that day, felt perfectly snug around her waist. Not tight, not loose. Just right. When she got home, she pulled the old analog bathroom scale out of the garage. She stepped on it, holding her breath. The needle swung up, hesitated, and settled firmly on 148.5. Sarah stared. Her reflection in the medicine cabinet showed a woman whose hips had narrowed to an almost frightening degree, whose arms were now slender rods. She looked like she'd dropped 30 pounds in 14 days. The scale was lying. Had to be. The following morning, she found the horror had escalated. She had been shrinking in her sleep. Her wedding band, which had been snug for years, was suddenly loose, but it didn't spin on her finger. It felt like her finger had shrunk, but the ring had shrunk along with it, maintaining the same relationship. She slipped on a pair of ankle boots. Her feet felt strangely tiny inside them, yet the boots were laced up just as tightly as they were last week. She called a doctor, frantic. "I'm losing myself. I'm shrinking, but nothing is changing." The doctor told her to measure her weight on a medical-grade scale and check her thyroid. At the clinic, a stern nurse led her into a sterile room. Sarah stripped down to her underwear, feeling cold. She looked at her arms. They were rail-thin, the skin nearly translucent. She was clearly a fraction of her former size. The nurse zeroed the massive, old-fashioned balance scale. Sarah stepped on. The nurse adjusted the weights, sliding the metal blocks with deliberate care. Blick, blick. 148.5 pounds, the nurse announced, jotting it down without a glance. Sarah looked down at the platform. Her feet, which now seemed impossibly delicate and narrow, completely filled the space where they rested, pressing against the edges of the metal. If she had lost 50 pounds, her feet should look small and lost on the plate. But they didn't. They fit. Panicked, Sarah ran back to the changing room. She put on her clothes. The size 8 jeans, the medium-sized sweater. They draped and stretched perfectly, tailored to her current skeletal form. She looked in the mirror. Her face was hollow, her eyes too large for their sockets, her body alarmingly small, yet her belt was on the third notch, exactly where it had always been. It wasn't that the scale was wrong or the clothes were elastic. It was that she was shrinking, but the entirety of her personal reality. Her weight, the physical dimensions of her clothing, the size of her wedding ring, the space her feet occupied, was shrinking with her, remaining fixed in its relation to her current size. She was not changing relative to the outside world. She was changing relative to an invisible, unchanging blueprint. The terror hit her in a cold, paralyzing wave. The 148.5 pounds wasn't a measurement of her mass. It was the label on her container. And the container, the size of her personal reality, was dissolving, but the label itself remained fixed. She was down to skin and bone, but she wasn't seeing bone. She was seeing a perfect, scaled-down version of her former self, perpetually the same size 8, perpetually 148.5 pounds. Sarah put her hand on the doorknob, noticing how impossibly small her fingers were. Yet the knob felt just as large as it always had. She took a deep breath and felt a strange, sucking sensation in her chest. Then she looked down. There was a faint dusting of fine navy blue fabric fibers on the clinic floor where she was standing. Her size 8 clothes had just fit her perfectly, but they had to be shedding the excess material that was no longer needed for her diminishing form. The fibers were the only things escaping the fixed point. She lifted her hand to touch her face, but before her fingers could meet her cheek, they passed right through the air and began to dissipate into a fine gray dust. She let out a silent, internal scream. Her vocal cords were already too small to produce sound. The last thing Sarah saw, as the navy blue fabric of her skirt began to buckle and pool onto the floor, was the bright yellow sign on the wall, the emergency evacuation diagram, which looked exactly the same size as it always had to her rapidly vanishing eyes. She was gone. But somewhere, a size 8 skirt and a pair of boots settled onto the polished tile, and on a desk in the clinic, a file read, "Sarah. Weight. 148.5 pounds. Healthy." If you enjoyed this tale, please subscribe so you don't miss our next descent into the dark.